weeks since we did this, so maybe we'll catch on. 1 Samuel chapter 1. I want to start at verse 21. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 21. This story is written, 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 21. This story has a lot of interesting things in it, a lot of ups and downs. We've traced a little bit, I know it's been a few weeks ago now, but of Hannah's life. Remember, she was barren, she couldn't have a child. Elkanah thinks he needs another option. He marries Peninnah. Peninnah has children. Hannah still can't. Peninnah's giving her a hard time. Elkanah doesn't seem to know what to do. And Hannah ends up not eating with tears and just dismayed, and goes to the tabernacle and prays and makes a vow. And we've been through all of that. So she's had these ups and downs, and then we'll find out that God grants her request. God grants her request, and she has this son. And then there's another, then just when everything's okay, it's going to get difficult again. Here's point number 1 tonight as we read this story. I'll read verse 21. It says, "The next year Elkanah and his family went on their annual trip to offer a sacrifice to the Lord and to keep his vow." Verse 22, "But Hannah did not go. She told her husband, 'Wait until the boy is weaned. Then I'll take him to the tabernacle and leave him there with the Lord permanently.'" So another test's coming, another trial's coming. Right now she gets to stay with Samuel. Right now, at this moment, she's not going on the annual trip. She is staying home, and she said, "I'm going to wait until the boy is weaned." They reckon that's about 3 to 5 years of age. And so she's getting time with Samuel. She gets time on her own with Samuel whilst they all go for the annual trip. But here's the lesson. To be content. There's many days, different days in your life, right? There's many different seasons. What you're in today, what you're going through today, you might not tomorrow. Life just goes like that. There's easy times, there's hard times, there's fun times, and not so fun times. Your life kind of goes like that, right? Hannah's life has gone like that. She's gone from barren to having a child, to now having to give up a child, to then having more children. So life is just like that. But I think the more I understand and the more I live and the more things I struggle with, and I think about Paul, and godliness comes with great contentment, and just to be content, he says, I've learned to be content. And so point number 1 is this, just today, it doesn't matter, listen, contentment was sealed with Jesus, right? If you have Jesus, when you come to the cross, you can be content. Obviously, we're not content a lot, but that's not his fault. That's our fault. The truth is you can't be content without him, but you can be content with him. The joy of the Lord is our what? Is our strength, right? So joy is the key, being content. And the trick is, the power that we can have is that in every day, in every season of life changes, right? We get older, things change, we lose things, whatever. Life's just like that. But we can, because of Jesus, be content in every day, in every season. So it doesn't matter what season you find yourself in tonight. It doesn't matter what's ahead. It doesn't matter what's behind. The power of Jesus is to be content. That's a lot of power, right? It's not content. Listen, we might buy into the regular lie. I'll be content when, right? I'll be content when. And you can fill that in with 1,000 different things. I'd be content if. That's another lie of the enemy. I'll be content when. I'd be content if. Maybe we're so distracted we don't even think about contentment. But that's all lies of the enemy. The truth is we can be content. So whether Hannah was barren, whether she has children, whether Elkanah is crazy or not, or Peninnah is going on at her or not, you can be content, right? And so we need to all learn to be content in every day, in every season that we're in. By doing that, what we're going to have to do is not covet. There were surely moments when Hannah struggled and she looked at Peninnah who had children. And it's easy to look at someone and covet what they don't have. That's why it's a big part of the 10 Commandments. Don't covet your neighbor's ox, donkey, wife, whatever, all of this stuff. Coveting means that you want what somebody else owns. That what somebody else has, you want. How many times is our flesh tempted to covet? And it can range from little things we covet to crazy things. You can covet money. You can covet things. There's all kinds of stuff. Yeah, cake. Well, that's a whole nother. You just take cake. You don't covet it. All right. But we're not to covet. That is how we do it. We don't covet. And here's a big one. And the Bible's clear about this. You don't worry about tomorrow. We spend so much. And by the way, how many tomorrows did you rightly predict? Like, the funniest thing to me is when, and I get it in business and stuff, but when people are like, well, me and the Lord are going to make a 5-year plan. Go ahead. I mean, if you made a 5-year, is the last 5 years what you expect it to be? Like, is anyone like, well, this is exactly how I thought it was going down? I mean, the next day, the next month, you try and predict the next 5 years. Listen, if you make it, if you hit it completely, you'll be preaching from now on. Look, we worry so much about tomorrow, and the Bible's clear. Give us this day our daily bread, and don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow's tomorrow. So we're not to covet. We're to be content. And you see all this in this story, and we'll go through it. You're not to worry about tomorrow. Why I say that in this context is there's coming a day. See, it's time with Samuel. How sweet was time with Samuel? But there's coming a tomorrow where she has to walk away. Today's fine. Yesterday was bad. I was barren. Today is great. I've got Samuel, but tomorrow's coming, and I'm going to have to give him up. And so tomorrow's coming. But she could never imagine what God is going to do and how God is going to use it. And I think for Hannah or for us, she has pains and problems of yesterday, right? Peninnah had given her a hard time. I'm not sure that having Samuel just repaired that situation. But there are things that hurt from yesterday. And I don't literally mean like 24 hours ago. I mean from our past, from things previous. And we sometimes cry over that. And we become entangled with the pains and the problems of yesterday. But what we're to do is just be still and know God, and today feast on his daily bread. It's gone, right? We get entangled with our past. Look, should you learn from it? Yes. Don't repeat the same. There's a lot. You can learn stuff from the past. But yet, Paul says, forget, like, what's past is past. I press forward now. I'm going on. You can get entangled by your past. You can get entangled by your present. You can get entangled by your tomorrows. So our deal is not to be entangled. In verse 21, Hannah has been through these ebbs and flows. We met her as she would go on the annual trip where Peninnah would make fun of her. And they're to take this trip again, this annual trip to sacrifice to the Lord. But Hannah doesn't go. Hannah says, this isn't the time to go. When I've weaned him, when I've got time with him, then I'll go. She's been through a lot as a character, right? It ebbs and flows. Life ebbs and flows. It did for Hannah. It will for us. Here's what I'll tell you. Some seasons, let's say seasons, are awesome, right? You probably look back and think your 20s were awesome, right? Our mind tricks us, by the way, and the past was always like fantastic. But if you read your diary, you'd be like, there was some problems. But there are seasons of life. There are seasons where it's just awesome, right? Maybe you just got married and you're having children. And you look back and as a whole, you think that season of life was really precious. It was really cool. And then there are some seasons that you're like, man, that was rough. If some seasons are awesome, some seasons are awful. In Hannah's life, having Samuel, awesome. Not being barren would seem awful, right? But here's the thing. You can get in that trap. See, when seasons are awesome, then I can be content, and then I don't have to covet, and then I don't have to worry. But here again, here's the plan of the Lord by the power of the Holy Spirit, that whether the seasons are awesome or whether they're awful, they all accomplish the same thing. What awesome seasons do and what terrible seasons do, what being barren does and having Samuel does, is it inspires an awe of God. Like terrible seasons, hard seasons, rough seasons are meant to show you how weak you are and how mighty and strong and needed God is. So in your terrible seasons, what God is doing is inspiring awe. And in your awesome seasons, you see, having Samuel was awesome. Looking at Samuel would be amazing. But what did it do? It promoted awe again. So do you see in both seasons, God is promoting all. God is promoting himself. Whether it's rough or whether it's awesome, God is telling you the same thing. He's producing this awe, this reverence, this fear, this wisdom, this joy in him to prove to you and others that he and he alone is awesome and that he is worthy. And you learn that he alone is awesome and worthy in good times and in bad times. In this moment, she is getting to do what she wanted to do. She's getting the answer to her request. She is simply doing what she had begged the Lord for, and that's being a mom. That's what she had prayed for. Give me a son. I just want to be a mom. And guess what? God had granted her it. Now she's a mom. Hannah's difficulties are coming. Difficult moments are coming. But as she sits there in nights like this, especially when she's alone, as she sits there with Samuel, what was she to do? See, worry about, man, why did I make that vow? Every time she looked at Samuel, she would see God, but she would also remember her vow. So what do you do? And what was she meant to do? What do we do in difficult moments? And what do we do in really good moments? Hannah's having a really awesome moment with Samuel. She's being a mom. She's having a really close relationship with her little baby. And she was simply to do these things, to rest and delight in the Lord. To sit there with Samuel and just rest. To delight in God and his goodness and his provision and his gifts. Yesterday and its pains and problems had come and gone for Hannah. And they will for us too. They'll come and go. Again, we think a lot about tomorrow, right? And it may not be as good as you think. It may be worse than you think. But what is our task today? See, that's what the devil wants you to do, is worry so much about tomorrow that you wreck today. How many days have we ruined worried about the past or the future? We lose. I don't want to know how many days I've wasted. And these things we think about tomorrow, but our task is to simply worship God today. To thank God today. To rest in his provision, his daily bread today. To find fullness and contentment. And that's what I'm saying. Our flesh cries out, Pastor, I can't be content. If you knew my circumstances, you wouldn't be telling me to be content. Well, my answer to that would be, well, you really have to understand who Jesus is then. That's a power. He can give you, no other man will do that. You know that, ladies, right? No money will do that. No job will do that. No season of life will give you content. Paul says it the best. I've learned to be content in any situation. I've had a lot. I've had a little. I've been safe. I've been persecuted. I've had rough days, brilliant days. I mean, you would think of anyone. Listen, if Paul had to learn contentment, Paul had there was hard times for Paul a lot. But he also had an amazing ministry. I mean, most pastors would die for his ministry. And yet he fought this, and he said, I had to learn to be content. Here's what I'd say in context of this story with Hannah as you watch her on the other side with her baby, knowing that a hard time is coming. Don't let thoughts of an unknown tomorrow make you forget of what you know about God today. Like unknown thoughts about tomorrow rob you of what you know about God even now. What do you know about God? He's good. He's peace. He's love. He's joy. His purposes are pure and perfect. You learn a lot about God today, right? You learn, and we can worry about tomorrow, and we forget that God's right here, right now. Right here, right now. Hannah, in this moment, in verse 21 and 22, when she's alone and she said, I'm going to wait. I'm not going to the tabernacle this year, but when I go, I'm going to leave him with the Lord. She was to enjoy the solitude with Samuel. And here's what I'll tell you. In hard times, in times that are painful, you know what you have to do? And before that, especially before it, maybe during it is too late. But before it, as Hannah's about to face this conundrum of, and she pulls it off, she does it. But walking and giving away your child is a really difficult thing to do. So as she looks at Samuel, as she's sitting there for the 3 years, you know what she has to do? She has to learn as much as she can about the Lord. She has to, like, hard days are coming, right? So in the times that seem not so difficult, we make the mistake of only praying when it's hard. Like, we don't need church, we don't need this, life's all right, and then life crashes, then we're like, 911 emergency, Lord, where are you? But really, when she's got Samuel in her arms, what she needs to be doing is realizing what that says about God. And learning as much as she can about God. And time alone. And here, she's really, really, really going to need that. Like, to do what she's going to do, she really needs to know who God is. She really needs to trust God. If Hannah has doubts about God, how do you leave your boy at the tabernacle? You can't. If you don't know God, how are you going to do what he's calling you to do? How much did the 3 Hebrew boys know God? How much did Daniel know God? You can't not train and then jump in the lion's den. You know, when you don't train and they say don't pray, you know what you do? You don't pray. Daniel refused to stop praying. But that's because Daniel had this intimacy with God, and Daniel had somehow got there. Time alone, and here's what you need sometimes. Just to sit on your own a minute. And to just sit and think about how many memorial stones God has built. It wouldn't take Hannah very long to look at a baby and think, this is a memorial stone. But we're very good. In fact, I would say tonight, if we had 10 complaints or 10 memorial stones, we'd be quicker with the complaints than we are the memorial stones. Like, we'd have to think, what's God done for me? But the complaints are just, like, quick. All of us. We gotta sit back sometimes. Look, who knows how this election's going to go? But I'm telling you, whatever happens, you've got memorial stones to get you through whatever happens. Just step back and just start thinking about what God has done. All right, so be content. Number 2, we got to rely wholly and truly on the Lord. Look at verse 20. Verse 20, it says, they returned home to Ramah in 19. Elkanah slept with Hannah. The Lord remembered her plea. Verse 20, and in what? And in due time. That we don't know, that I don't think that means they got home and got pregnant straight away. But it says in due time. You know what that really means? Yes. How many times, and see, we go back to point number 1, be content when? Even when due time hasn't come yet. You know and I know we've all struggled with due time. And what happens when we struggle with due time? Like, hey, God, I kind of believe you're going to do it, but can we Abraham and Sarah, 25 years, right? A year away from doing it, they're laughing. It's been a long time. And it's not sometimes that we don't believe God can do it, but man, Sarah's idea was Hagar. It's not working quick enough, so Elkanah did the same thing. Elkanah was like, hey, this baby thing's not working, let me marry Peninnah. Due time is God's time, and we struggle with that, right? Like, hey, God, I was all right a year ago, a month ago, a minute ago, but we're really pushing this. When I told you do what you want, me and you clearly were on some kind of weird thing because I'm not sure what you're thinking, but I was thinking a lot quicker. And how many times does your timing and God's timing match equally? Sometimes they might. Well, yeah, probably. Well, maybe so. But it says in due time. So Hannah, we have to rely wholly and trust on the Lord. Whether she was barren, whether she has Samuel for a minute or two, whether she's giving up Samuel, whether she's living with Elkanah, whether she's getting trouble with Peninnah, whatever happens in her life, this is just one little fragment of her life. She has to, listen, Peninnah can't be trusted, right? Elkanah can't be trusted. Eli can't be trusted. I mean, who do you have? Who do you have? She's got to trust the Lord. Without him, us, we can do nothing, we'll do nothing. And here's what we've been talking about. We must worship whilst we wait. Whilst you wait. And how many times, There's nothing worse than the doctor's waiting room, right? It takes you forever to get in, and then you get your hopes up. You go into a room, and then they wait again. And it's like, okay. And then you see the assistant, and then you wait again. And then the doctor finally comes in, spends a minute with you, and charges you $2,000. All right. I mean, that's basically how that goes, right?
But sometimes when they're waiting, isn't it just because he says no? It's not for you.
Well, sometimes he's directing us down a different path. Yes, he doesn't always say yes, correct. But whilst we're waiting, whilst she's barren, or whilst she's waiting for this time to, whatever we're waiting on, we've got to worship. We're not waiting till it's happened. Like when she was barren, she had to worship. When she has to go and give Samuel up, she has to worship. We've got to walk through with God. What God demands of all of us is faith and trust and patience as we wait for our due time. In Proverbs 3:5, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll what? Lean not on your own understanding. In Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 14. Remember, whether it's barrenness or whether it's giving up your child to Eli at the tabernacle, whether it's fun times or hard times, whatever you're going through, God understands what we go through. God understands what we're facing. And here's what I take real comfort in. One of the hardest things to do must be to lose a child, right? And yet there is one who, when Hannah comes and says, man, how can I sacrifice my child? Not kill him, but how can I sacrifice my child for the kingdom of God? You know who knows more about that than anybody? Yeah, the Father does. I mean, if you tell them, Father, I've lost my child, you know what he can say? I did too. I mean, even in that kind, Jesus, God, the Spirit, they understand. Look at Hebrews 4, verse 14. We have a great high priest who has entered heaven. He's entered heaven because he won. He's sitting down because he won. He's going to come back, but he entered heaven glorious, victorious. I believe he brought the victorious from Hades with him. He has entered heaven. Jesus, the Son of God. And here it is. Here's the trick. Here it is. Hebrews 4:14. Let us hold firmly to what? To your money? Hold firmly to what you have physically. Hold firmly to each other. Is that the answer? Here's the trick of it, and this is why false teaching, and here's why false prophets got killed, and here's why you have to know the Word of God, because you have to hold firmly to what you believe. What's crazy about Christianity is when you're lost, you buy it, you understand it, and you get saved. Like you realize you went from lost to saved, and you understood, like the gospel. No one comes to the cross and says, I'm not sure this is going to work. I mean, you went from lost to like, Jesus is my answer. The Word of God came, the Spirit of God moved, and all of a sudden you had this desire and this understanding. And somehow, even as a child, you can believe in the gospel. God doesn't change, and see, truth doesn't change. But what happens is we hold firmly sometimes to things that aren't true. And that'll train wreck you. You have to understand the truth. Holding firmly to a lie is suicide. You have to know what you believe. You have to know it's the truth. And I've said this before. You can know most things about God. If you're off on one thing, you're going to have problems. Like all the characteristics of God. Let's just say mercy. If you don't understand his mercy, if you don't believe in his mercy, I think he's loving, I think he's gracious, I think he's powerful, but mercy I'm not sure about. Just one thing will wreck you. It will wreck you. That's how important it is to know what you believe. And the author, I think Paul or whoever, says, hold firmly to what you believe. In every season, Hannah, when you're barren, hold firmly to what you believe about God. When you get pregnant, hold firmly to what you believe. When you have to give Samuel up, hold firmly to what you believe. And look at what it says. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all the same testings we do, yet he did not what? Think of the task Hannah had before her in verse 22. I'm going to wait until the baby is weaned. In 1 Samuel 1:22, wait until the baby is weaned, traditionally about 3 years of age. And then she says this. Think about these words coming from her lips. Then I will take him to the tabernacle and leave him there. You know how hard that is to do? How do you explain that to Samuel? I mean, most 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds are going to have, why you leave me? Think about, I mean, we read this story, but think about what she's saying. And whilst you're weaning him, it's almost like, look, talking about, thinking about, praying about something that seems afar off is a lot easier than when it actually like if something's 3 years away, I don't really worry about it. But when it's 3 minutes away, she says, I will take him to the tabernacle and I will leave him with the Lord. And what's the next word? This is critical and this is crucial. For a minute, permanently, forever. You know how long permanently is? How many times would the devil say to her, you need to go back, you need to go back? You need to take him back. You think every day was easy for Samuel? She'd visit him in this yearly thing. She'd go back, she'd bring him clothes, she'd visit with her kid. So it wasn't just once she left him what? Repeatedly. You imagine, and you think everyone else understood? You did what? Weren't you barren? Yeah. Didn't you finally get a baby? Yeah. And you decided just to leave him? Yeah. Sometimes what God's doing in your life makes no sense to anybody else. But it does to you because you're hearing him, because you're following him, because she said it. Imagine that walk to the tabernacle. It's like Abraham again, right? Imagine her walk to the tabernacle. And imagine that moment, which we'll get to maybe, where she has to what?
How far of a journey was it?
That's a good question. I should know that. I don't know that. I'll look that up. I don't know. But even if it's a mile or whatever, I mean, it's... But there's a trick to it. See, I say that, but what I'm getting at is that, and I think she's actually there, that journey to give away Samuel can be full of contentment and power and joy. It can. And I think she does, and I'll try to prove how. Think about this moment, though. She's got to give Samuel up to Eli, to the tabernacle, really to God. But what spiritual disciplines and traits did she need? Think about that. We talked about on Sunday, we don't shadow box. You have to be disciplined. You have to be trained. I mean, what spiritual disciplines did she have to be strong in to carry this through? Think about some. What would it be? She had to be trained in the faith for sure, yes. What else? You think she prayed a little bit about it? Yeah, her trust. Listen, if you're going to do this kind of thing, you have to be disciplined. You have to pray. You have to get to know the Lord. You have to trust. I mean, there's all kinds of things, right? The traits she was being asked to have were faithful and honoring and worship and truth and all kinds of stuff. She was being asked to illuminate those things in the moment. I'm telling you, whether it's 3 years or 5 years or whatever, all those times needed to be a time of spiritual training. I mean, if she doesn't get to know God in those 3 years, she's in trouble. This is your time. This is your moment when seasons are okay.
But do you think she got angry during those 3 years and said, why do I have to do this?
I don't think she, well.
Or was she so committed that would be awesome?
I mean, I think she probably had hard days, but I think there's a lot of positive stuff about her. And I don't think we'll get there in a minute, but I don't think she. No, because she kind of made the deal herself, first of all. But, yeah, I don't doubt that it was difficult. But I think what I'm saying is I can imagine how hard it was, but there can still be a contentment. There can still be a joy. And I'm going to ask a question in a minute that might kind of follow on from that. But she needed to be trained, right? She needed to have this spiritual training. As we read Eli, by the way, when you read about Eli, he can't take care of his own family. Eli dies.
And that's who she's leaving him with.
Yeah. So, humanly speaking, you don't leave him with Eli. I mean, we'll read about Eli. You don't, like, he's not the person you're like, oh, dude can't take care of his own kids. He's going to die because the Lord comes against him because of what he's allowed and all of that. It's not like Eli's fantastic. Let's leave him with Eli. Eli isn't the best person to leave your child with. Leaving Samuel would be crazy to do humanly. How many questions might she have? How many questions are other people peppering at her? What's Peninnah saying? Who else would understand what you're doing? What kind of messages she's sending to your own son? All of this stuff is going on. And yet the point we need to see is she's not leaving in Samuel in fate's hand. Like she's not leaving Samuel in luck. Like, cross your fingers. She's not leaving Samuel in Eli's hand. She's leaving Samuel in the hands of God. And that changes everything. You see, that's what we have to do at a funeral, right? You don't leave it out to luck. You don't leave it out to a priest or good works. Or you leave it to the hands of God. And so when she's leaving it with God. If she's leaving it with anyone else, you should panic, run, and take him back. She's leaving it in the hands of God. When you are trusting the Lord, you're not leaving it to fate. You're not leaving it to chance. You're not leaving it to anybody else. You see, people struggle with like, well, what happens if I give to this person and they misuse it or mismanage it? Well, you're not. When God asks you to do something, you're just leaving it up to him. A vow is a vow. God was God. But in order to do what she's about to do, in order to give up your son, in order to follow through on that vow, to supremely trust the Lord, to give to him, to sacrifice for him, you better know him. You better know him. You better hold on to what you know about him. This is really interesting. I've never thought about this. I've taught through the whole book at least once. And I've never seen this. I often think about Hannah, but I've never really thought about Elkanah. Do you think it was easy for him? How desperate was he for a child? He was desperate enough to do what? Yeah. Listen, barrenness didn't just affect Hannah. Barrenness messed Elkanah up so bad, hurt him so much that he thought, sorry, I got to kind of jump ship a minute and I got to get another wife because I need a child. He was saying, I'm not doing life without what? Without a child, without an heir. I mean, that was clearly his position. If he had been content, see, Elkanah is a strange character, because if he had been content and just said, Lord, I leave it in your hands, and if all I have is Hannah, that's all you're going to give me, I'm good with it. Things would have worked out a whole lot better for everybody. But he couldn't be content. And I'm telling you, whenever we get discontent and whenever we think we're going to trust ourselves or anyone else, it starts getting horrible. Not just for you, but for everyone around you.
With him being the husband, could he have forbidden her to do this?
I'm going to get into that in a minute. No. And yeah. Yes. And we're about to get in that. That's my third point. He testifies to how hard the task. Look at what he says. And this is God. Verse 23, what does he say? To your point, in that society, do you think she had any rule over him at all? How many women could say, hey, I'm giving our child away, sorry. She makes vows that it's. Listen, I'm not trying to be funny, but they would be hard vows to hear from anybody else. I mean, if your wife comes home and says, by the way, I just promised the Lord if we have children, we're going to give him up forever. Probably something you want to talk about. Right? And women didn't have that right, especially back then. I mean, you imagine going home and telling your wife, I just made a vow to the Lord, whenever we get pregnant, we're going to give him up. So Elkanah, I've never really thought about this or seen this, and this is what study is amazing, and reading the Bible, you see things that you've never seen, and you're like, man, I've taught this, and can I go back and add stuff because I missed it? Look at what he says. And may your cash? May our friends, may I. What does he say? May the Lord help you keep what? your promise. What's he saying? Hannah, Hannah, if you don't rely wholly on the Lord, if you don't know who he is, if you're not reaching out to him, you know what he's saying? You got no chance. You've got no chance. Hannah, you're talking about giving up Samuel. And I've seen how you look at him. And I've seen how you enjoy spending time with him. And I've seen how much delight he's brought you. And he's telling her, I'm telling you, may the Lord help you keep your promise. In other words, this is a promise so deep and so high and so wild that without the touch and the help and the guidance and the power of God, guess what? You ain't doing it. It's not you willing your way. It's not pulling yourself up. It's not like, well, I have my friends and my family to help me. No, no, no. If you don't rely on the Lord, your promise is shot. The world won't help you. The flesh won't help you. The devil won't help you. You can't help yourself. He says, may the Lord help you keep your promise. Other versions say, may the Lord keep his promise. Well, that's not up for debate. I mean, he'll keep his promise. Either way, there's a total reliance on the Lord, who is worthy of everything we put on him. Remember 1 Peter 5:7? Cast how many of your cares? Cast all your cares upon who? Why? Here again, look, you have to know this. If this is in doubt, one little thing. If this is in doubt, Hannah is messed up. Cast all your cares upon him. All of them? Yeah, because he's good in every area. So my finances, yeah, he's got it. My spiritual stuff, yeah, he's got it. My physical stuff, yeah, he's got it. Cast every single care. By the way, no one else wants all your cares. No one else can handle all your cares. No, listen, but we can't handle our own cares. So if you're chunking cares on me, guess what? And now I can't. I mean, I'm meant to be running this race, right? My own cares are slowing me down. If I take on everyone else's cares, guess what? I'm done. Yeah, I'm done. Cast all your cares upon him. Why? For he what? Cares for. Okay. If you doubt that for a second, where are you going? If you doubt that the Lord cares for you, how far are you going to make it? When does the devil come and say, does the Lord really care? When you're down. In what kind of ways? Think about it. Think about when sometimes, or when it's good. When we're giving birth to Samuel, God cares for me. Look. But think about all the times the devil tries to say, don't cast your cares on him. Why? Because it will wreck you. It will slow you down. It will mess you up. If you're taking your cares yourself, you can't be content. You can't do what we're saying to do. There will be no joy. But he says, cast all your cares upon him because he cares for what? Man, Hannah's going to have to do that day. Look, I have a bunch of questions maybe. What's going to happen to him? Can I handle this? Lord, am I ever going to be pregnant again? I mean, all kinds of stuff. But she's like, you know what? Every care I have, I've just got to shift it to you. And you know what's awesome? Jesus, God, the Spirit can take every care and still run as fast and free as they ever did. Like, cares to them doesn't slow them down. Like Jesus taking on your cares doesn't slow him down a bit. We think we're going to be a hero and take cares and we're done. We weren't designed to, yes, we can care for each other. But to really, truly take the care, you can't find contentment in my care. You can only find contentment in Christ and the way he cares for us. And here to your point and my last point tonight. So number 1, be content. Number 2, rely wholly on the Lord, basically. Number 3, I find this really, listen, this is worth the price of admission. If you don't get excited, I'm sorry about you, but this is my best bit. Do you see how important Elkanah is in this story? To your point, if Elkanah says we're not doing it, she's made a lot of she's promised that Samuel would be a Nazirite. You know who does that normally? The person. The person chose to be God, but they said, I'm going to take a Nazirite vow. Before he's even born, she's like, by the way, I'm signing up for a Nazirite vow. And how in the world do you give away your baby without speaking to your husband? Listen, nobody is going to bash Elkanah. Now, God can do whatever he wants. But in that society, if Elkanah says you're not doing it, guess what? He won't go to court. He won't be in trouble. No one's coming after him. You think men were like, hey, do what you want? How does Elkanah say simply, I'm good with it? Yeah, I'm good with it. The only thing I'll tell you is, you better trust the Lord. May the Lord help you. May God help you. You imagine that. You imagine going home and thinking he's going to go mental. He's going to go crazy. And yet, he says, may the Lord just help you keep your promise. Here's what I want to say. God has put a calling on your life. But it doesn't just involve you. It involves other people. Like when you're together, when you're married, you think God just calls one person and says, nah, never mind the other one. Like in our own life, in my ministry, God might put a calling on my ministry, but you know who has to be involved in that? Tasha and Landry. So what does God do? Here's what I'm telling you. There's certain people who are essential to your calling. Like staff that are meant to be here, they're essential to my calling here. Congregants that are meant to be here, you're essential to the calling. Can I shout at you, scream at you, bribe you to get you here? No. So you know what God does? He moves in the heart and the mind and the spirit of other people to get them to where they need to be, spiritually, physically, whatever. In other words, what he says is, hey Tasha, I'm going to move in you too. Landry, I'm even going to move in you. So that all three of you in one accord can move. Because what's the option? What do I do if Tasha's like, I'm not moving with you, I'm staying with my dad? Then what? I don't know what would happen. And we're not always on the same page, but you know what you'll find if you give it time? God starts to move.
So Elkanah had to have as much faith as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's left it to the Lord. He's dealt with it pretty well. He stayed with her. He's there. I mean, he kind of messes up at the start, the whole Penina thing. But men can't be perfect all the time, right? I mean, yeah. But I want you to see that. I want you to see that if your children are a part of your calling, if your wife or husband are a part of your calling, if there's someone significant to your calling, that God will move in their heart, their mind, and their spirit. You don't have to. You don't have to force them. You don't have to make them. Hannah didn't have to yell and scream at Elkanah. Somehow, by God's grace and mercy and calling and anointing, all he says is, God, help you. You see, that's what he does. That's what we believe, right? Even on search teams for pastors, that's what he has to do, right? And it might be only for a time or a season or whatever, but he has to move in their heart and their mind and spirit to get people. See, even before I come, there's lots of things at play, right? Just getting from Texas to here, but God starts moving in the heart and the mind and the spirit of people. And you know what a foolish thing to do is? To try and manipulate, to move that, to mandate that, to worry about that. God moves when he wants in due time. And you know what I believe? Like people think they have all this kind of whatever, but like if God wants you to get somewhere, guess what? He can change the mind or the heart or the spirit or the situation of anything or anyone. Think about that. What God's calling you, like Elkanah was needed. Sometimes you can't do your calling on your own. You're going to need help. You're going to need people. And God is faithful to work in other people. Elkanah had to be hurting. He had to be devastated by Hannah's barrenness, and that's why he marries Penina. And yet now he seems to be willingly surrendering his son. Why? Because God's working on his heart and his mind and his spirit. Now, if Elkanah says, no, look, God's sovereign and God will deal with it. I'm not saying Elkanah can, mess it up. No, you can't mess it up. God will do something. Whatever you think is best is his response. I don't think that was easy for him, do you? I don't think, if Elkanah opposes this, it's a much different and much more difficult situation. Women didn't have the rights or the authority to dictate whether they kept a man's son or not. Hannah commits that Samuel would take the Nazirite vow before he's even born. And yet, you know what you'll find? That though she kind of did all of this, and though she asked did these things, and Elkanah's involved, and Peninnah's involved, and Samuel's obviously going to be involved, and other children, and all of this stuff, you know what you'll find as you read this story? That God does exactly what he says he'll do. He works everything together for his good, and for their good and his glory. And God weaves this story. And he works in all of these different people. And what you'll find as we read Samuel is God works everything out. And you know what? When he's done with Samuel, you'll see it in David. You'll see it all through Samuel. You see God just working everything out. That when the arrows come at David from Saul and they miss, God is working everything out. And sometimes the reverse is true, and I'll finish. We've been reading about Esther and how Haman had to do all of these things, and how Vashti had to be taken from queen. And God sometimes does the opposite. God sometimes allows people to do things that gives you the opportunity to do what he's asked you to do. In other words, if you read Esther, Vashti stepped up and did something that no one thought she could do. That was unheard of for a queen to disobey the king. And it sent them all off in a frantic mess. But if Vashti doesn't do that, the queen's not open. So sometimes God allows Saul to go a bit crazy. You know why? Because it fulfills his purposes. So sometimes God works like in Elkanah and makes it good. But sometimes he allows things to go. And he allows that because what we don't know is he's working everything together for our good. I'm going to finish my favorite. Well, that was my favorite maybe. The next one is coming, but I'll leave that next week because we've got business